and they don't return.
Welcome to another episode of the Dawn of Shades. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and today is May 18th, 2010. This is episode 409. More about this program and the guests that have provided us with such fascinating conversations can be found on our website, www.exogenynetwork.com. Excuse me. The Dawn of Shades always tries to bring interesting people right to the audience to hear about both new and old ideas. We focus on the people, places, and ideas that don't always make the mainstream news, kinds of things that are frequently labeled as alternative or paranormal. For the show tonight, if you would like to have a question asked, you can email it to me at giascott@exogenynetwork.com or go through the virtual auditorium on Pal Talk by text. I do monitor the email during the program, so if you're listening outside of the virtual auditorium and would like to have a question answered, please email it to me, and I'll ask the question for you. In the virtual auditorium, just put it into text, and I'll try and catch it as the screen scrolls. If I miss it the first time, go ahead and repeat it again. And for those who are listening on a podcast, go ahead and email any questions to me. I'll try to get those answered for you as well. For everyone who likes to feel connected, I am on Facebook and Twitter. You can link to me there. There's also a Dawn of Shades fan page on Facebook. You can look at that as well. For the readers and the foodies, there's articles and blogs. You can find some material, surely, to interest you. And if you want, there's also a blog for the Dawn of Shades radio program. Tonight's guest is a very interesting woman with a book of practical interest to anyone who's ever lived in a haunted house or has any desire to pick up ghost hunting as a hobby. Her book, Ghosts of Central Arizona, offers more than the usual assortment of spooky stories, but it contains a lot of information for the novice ghost hunter as well. It also demystifies a topic that has enough natural mystery to go with it to begin with. So, let's welcome Heather Woodward to the program. Heather, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. How are you doing tonight?
Just fine. The first thing I'd like you to do is introduce yourself to the audience so they can find out who Heather is.
Wow, okay. Usually people just read my bio and I always go, oh my goodness. It always sounds so larger than life. I am a clairvoyant psychic, a psychometrist, which means I can touch objects and get information from it. And I'm a tarot reader and a paranormal investigator. It all kind of goes together. I know it sounds like it's different. And I actually went to school to be a journalist, but I became an author instead. And so I started to write about the stuff that I enjoy. And so I like ghosts. I like ghost stories. I like traveling. So that's what I did.
Uh-huh. Well, it makes sense to me. I lived in Central Arizona for a good chunk of my life.
Oh, awesome.
So, yeah, I have a lot of familiarity with some stories.
Very cool.
Yet I have to admit, I don't think I ever encountered a ghost in Central Arizona, come to think of it.
You're not the first.
Yeah, you know, I have in other places, but not there. There's lots of spooky stories, and I have had some very weird things that happened to me in Arizona, just not Central Arizona.
Arizona is one of those states, it seems like Arizona, New Mexico especially, where people go to sort of find themselves or to get away from something, just to reinvent themselves, or to find some sort of enlightenment or spirituality. So it's just a very strange place, and I find that most people, that not the locals, but people who migrate here, tend to have very strange experiences.
Yeah, you know, I think some of the strangest things I've dealt with have to be in Arizona. Now, some of them were given Native American names and whatnot, and seemed to fit that particular culture. But, I'm not Navajo, so to try and say that it was, one of these Navajo characters, I don't know, but I don't know what it was. I wasn't real thrilled with it, but yeah. I have seen a few strange things, heard some really strange things, and I was pretty familiar with the desert because I spent a lot of time camping on the Mogollon Rim and the Northern Plateau, and even in central Arizona. Yeah, so I did wander around there quite a bit. I got your book, and I'm looking through it, and I'm like, this has got so much more in it than just some spooky stories.
Yeah, and you were right. I don't know if I did email you, but I didn't. I think I was on my phone, so I didn't email you what I wanted to email you, which was that you're right. The name doesn't really speak for the book, and this is my first book, so in hindsight, I was like, wow, I'm kind of misrepresenting myself because people just expect ghost stories.
Yeah, this is almost like ghost hunting for dummies, even. Really.
It is a little bit,
because a lot of things, even though I've been working in the paranormal field for a long time, I don't specialize in ghost hunting. So the equipment, I really wasn't that familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was nice to see a really nice little description that told me what it was and how it worked.
Yeah, I tried
to listen to people talking about it, and it's like, okay, I know what a Ouija board is. I know what a pendulum is. I know what dowsing's all about. But as far as when you get in the electronic equipment, because I've got friends who go ghost hunting, and they get to talking about this stuff, and it's like, because I never go with them, I didn't know what they were talking about. Electromagnetic field detectors, and, to me that was like, you're looking for interference in your house. Okay, I don't know what you're doing with it. Yeah.
I think the reason why I did it that way is because I've been doing this since 1997, and I didn't start out with equipment, and then I did after a while. And then I'm the kind of person, though, that I just read everything I can on a subject, and I try everything out before as I'm doing it. But, I'm also learning, too. Like, I like the learning process of it all. And I found that a lot of investigators don't even know how to use the equipment that they're using. Like, they don't know the theories behind it, and they don't know what's actually going on with it. And then there's a lot of new investigators because they watch the TV shows, and then they just they buy the equipment, but they don't really take the time to really learn how to use it. And so I have to admit, the first part of the book, it was written out of a little bit of a frustration because I was like, look, before you investigate, please just read these 50 pages. It's not that long. It'll take you an hour. You'll get the bare bones of what you need to know, and then at least my hope was that at least people will read the first, even if they read 10 pages of it, they're still doing better than most people. So.
Yeah, I really did. That was probably my favorite part of the book was learning about different kinds of equipment. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about, because this is your area of expertise, something that I had been told is that on digital cameras, especially the ones with low resolution, which were like the first cameras that came out, that were available to the average consumer, they were low resolution. That they are more likely to pick up paranormal entities of some sort than traditional film cameras or the higher resolution cameras. Do you find this to be true?
No, but I know where that came from, and I understand why people say that. The newer cameras have shorter lenses, especially the new digital cameras, and what happens is dust and moisture and things can get into the inside of the lens easier. And so what happens is a lot of times people misconstrue that as paranormal activity when it's really just like something inside of the lens and the flash flashes, and then it changes the color of it. And so in that way, there are a lot more orbs and there are a lot more anomalies in pictures because of the digital cameras. But it's only because of the shorter lenses. It's very, very hard to find. I mean, I wrote a second book, and I had to research the spiritualism movement, and part of it was researching spirit photography. And there are very, very few pictures that are actually compelling. A lot of them you can just figure out how they did it, especially now with Photoshop and stuff. They have programs where if somebody puts a picture online and you want to see if it's real or not, you can actually go and run it through this program, and it'll tell you any programs that it was in, what the resolution was, what kind of camera it was taken on. So all that data is encrypted on the picture now. So it's really, people like to fake that kind of stuff, and people like to think that they're one-upping, but there's all kinds of, like I said, there's all kinds of programs that can find all the information out. So I don't think there's a difference. I think it's just with technology, with the advances, there's other issues that come with it, I guess.
Well, part of the reason I ask is this is when they first came out. I remember the first one I had was yellow. I don't remember. It cost like $150, and it took absolutely horrible pictures. I think you could put 8 or 10 of them on the camera. Was all. I mean, you didn't have memory cards or anything yet, you know.
Yeah.
And the first year or two with that camera, and then whatever it was I got after that, which I don't even remember now. If someone took a picture of me, it usually came out with something else superimposed over me, and I got really paranoid about it.
I would too.
Because it was specifically me. You could have a picture of somebody else before me and somebody else after me. The only one who was messed up was me. And the final straw was I was actually in my kitchen. This one was one of the later cameras because it had a flash on it. The first one didn't even have a flash. And I was making candy or rolling out dough or something like that. And the picture was taken of me. And when it was put on the computer, it wasn't me in the picture at all. It was someone with very long dark hair and what appeared to be a red feather hanging down on their right side.
Oh my God.
Hanging downward in their hair. This wasn't me. My hair was up. I have dark hair, but my hair was tied up, and I was wearing entirely different clothes. But this other figure was literally superimposed over me. You could see the rest of the kitchen just fine. You could see the outline of part of me with this other figure over me. And I finally got to the point I would not let anyone use a digital camera near me anymore.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And I did that. I stayed that way for a year or two. You could take a picture of anything else, just not me, not with a digital camera.
Yeah, I've heard stories like that, and it could be you. You know what I mean? I don't think it has to do with the equipment. It could be you. But, wow, that's a weird
now
story.
Nothing weird happened. I mean, I don't have any strange characters appearing in pictures with me, or anything like that. But, there for a while, it went on for about a year before I refused to let anybody take a picture of me with a digital camera.
Yeah, that's amazing. Again, I don't know. See, those kinds of things, you don't know what you're picking up on, and you could have just had something around you during that time for whatever reason. It'd be interesting to know what was happening in your life. But
yeah, because there was all sorts of places. I mean, one time I was in a canyon outdoors.
Wow.
It'd be indoors. It would be wherever I was. And like I said, the last straw was this long-haired character with a red feather. I was like, that's it. I'm done.
It's still amazing, yeah. It's one of the strangest things I've actually ever heard. But it's good. It's I don't know. I think when you have experiences like that, I think everybody who's in the paranormal world or anybody who believes in this kind of stuff, even if they're just armchair investigators or they just watch the TV shows or whatever, or they just go traveling, I think everybody who is really into it has had a personal experience like yours, and that's what makes them believe in it. That's what makes them search harder for it, I think the same can be said for anybody who's like into UFOs or into that kind of stuff too. I think it's usually most of the people that I've talked to about this stuff, you can always nail it down to one personal experience that changed their whole thought belief on it.
Oh, well, I guess mine, it must have occurred when I was very little. I remember we visited a haunted hotel in Arizona, La Posada in Winslow.
Okay.
And we had dinner there, and then we just toured the hotel. We weren't staying there. And my mother, I didn't, I was, I think in my 40s. Anyhow, my mother was there, and my daughter and some other people. And my mother proceeds to announce to everybody that I was a ghost magnet. I was like, I don't remember being a ghost magnet. But she said they always showed up when I was around. Well, I knew that we lived in haunted houses when I was a kid because, everybody had experiences in the house.
Right.
But, things would be seen, the one house, it was haunted by an old lady who had fallen down the stairs to the basement, which resulted in a broken hip and ultimately her death.
Wow.
Her thing was to hook a chain across the top of the stairs, which we normally never did. She'd hook that chain, she'd close the door, and she'd turn on the basement light.
Oh, my gosh.
And my dad went nuts changing locks. I mean, we were living in a small town in Iowa. We had more locks on our doors than somebody who lived in a big city like New York City. I mean, you had all these locks you had to undo to get in and out. And because he was sure somebody was getting in the house.
Wow.
So, no matter how many locks he put on the door, it was still happening. And it was because of old Mary Gibson.
His name was Old Man Gibson?
No, her name was Mary Gibson.
Oh, how strange. Okay.
Yeah, the whole story got even weirder because I was fairly young, I think we lived in that house between 3rd and 6th grade, 5th grade, something like that. And my mother's name is Mary. And she was doing something, and she met a woman who lived across town that she had never met before, whose name also happened to be Mary. And this lady looks at my mother, she says, "You're that lady I've been dreaming about.
Oh, my
Old
God.
Mary Gibson told me to tell you to lock that chain across the stairs."
That is very strange.
Yeah, Mary Gibson was a lady who had lived in the house, her and her husband, and she had actually died in the house after months of being an invalid after breaking her hip. I think that was in the 60s when she died. And, in that era, for an elderly woman to break her hip, that was not a good thing. They often did not heal.
Yeah.
And she had actually lived the last few months of her life as an invalid in the house.
Wow.
And, so that's the first real ghost story when I was old enough to know a lot of what was going on and hear what was going on and whatnot. Yeah.
That's amazing. So did it fuel your need to know? I mean, did you go out and sort of search for it in other aspects of your life?
You didn't really need to search for it. It was kind of like just there. It's like, do you search for the sun?
No, but I mean, did you search for answers in other aspects of your life? Did you?
Not really at that point. It's just, to me, it was just an accepted part of life. Oh, we've got a ghost.
Right.
So we got a ghost.
That's kind of how.
The next house we lived in that was haunted, the ghost wasn't nice.
Oh, okay.
And, I mean, what you'd see typically would be like a shimmery ball about the size of a basketball. And normally, like downstairs, it'd be floating. These are old houses, so they had like 12-foot ceilings. It'd be floating just below the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
That was just weird. It wasn't, you'd hear footsteps downstairs when you're upstairs, and when you're upstairs, vice versa. But the worst part was if you happened to get caught on the stairs when it was going up or down the stairs. It used the stairs, too.
Mm-hmm.
Because when it would pass you, I had to laugh when they came out with Ghostbusters because it was like you were coated in icy slime. There's no other way to describe it. It
I know
was
what you're
just
talking
such
about.
a yucky feeling and cold.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Exactly.
Pardon?
I said I know what you're talking about. Exactly. We actually lived in a house when I was in my my late teens, early 20s. I went back and forth between my house and my mom's house, moved in and out a few times, and she had a ghost in that house that left like this viscous material all over things sometimes on the carpet and stuff, and it did have that weird. It almost looked like what we consider ectoplasm or slime. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah.
This never left anything. I mean, we had things happen. Like one time, the refrigerator burst into flames. It was stood on the wall and the whole bit.
Oh my God.
And the refrigerator was still running, appeared to be fine. Now, my mother replaced it anyhow, but there was stuff like that would happen. Dishes would fly around the kitchen, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the one bedroom, we had a little Chihuahua Terrier mix. She weighed about 10 pounds. She had epilepsy. And she didn't like the one bedroom, which happened to be my brother's bedroom. She did not want to go in that room for anything. And the odd thing is that every time this would happen, that's where she would be, the room she didn't want to be in.
Oh.
But you would hear her yelping, and of course you go looking for the dog because the yelping often accompanied a seizure. Mm-hmm. And when you walk in, she'd be in we call it the yellow room. She'd be in the yellow room. And it would look, when you walked in the room, it would look like somebody had a hold of her around the midsection. You couldn't see anybody. And she'd be turning around and snapping and biting and yelping and carrying on. And when you walk in, it was like they'd see you and turn her loose.
Oh.
And she'd run hell-bent for leather out of that room, and you weren't going to get her out from under a bed or the sofa or something for the rest of the day.
Wow.
And, yeah, I don't know, they had it in for that dog, I think. Outside of that, one time, late at night, I felt somebody looking at me in the kitchen. I was doing dishes. And I turned around, and there was a man and a big black dog, like a Labrador. The dog was sitting beside the man, and they were standing across the kitchen from me. And they're looking at me, and I'm looking at them. And I remember sidling out of that kitchen, and in order to get to the door, I had to actually approach closer to them than what I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, because I'd go in front of the oven and the stove and the refrigerator. I remember I had my hands behind me on the furniture and stuff as I'm going past, and their eyes followed me, so they were fully aware that I was there. And their heads turned and looked at me, and then when I got to the doorway that leads to the rest of the house, I ran like crazy upstairs.
Wow.
But yeah, that was. And they were just as definite as could be. The man wasn't dressed in clothes that dated him.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, flannel shirt and jeans, something that could have been the 40s or could have been the 90s. This actually occurred in the 70s, but
wow.
It could, the clothes were indefinite. The dog was indefinite. There wasn't anything to say he came from such and such an era.
Wow. You've had some really intense experiences.
I don't know if I'd call that one intense, but it definitely scared me. I mean, as a kid, I was like, I guess 13, 14 years old. Not that old.
Yeah. No, but, I mean, most people don't have experiences to that extent. I mean, usually someone sees a ghost or the stories are always very tame in comparison. So there's, and that's what fuels people, but it's very, you've had some very just, I guess, on a scale of 1 to 10, yours on the other side. Yours is like on the 7, 8, 9 scale, where most people don't have that kind of extreme.
Well, now I live in New Orleans, which, here again,
of course,
where ghosts are just sort of matter of course.
Right, I was going to say, wow, you really just went for it.
Well, that town where I saw the man and the dog and we had the slimy ghost, that was one of these little bitty towns, 3,000 people, one bar, 21 churches at that time.
Wow.
It was a very religious town. My family was a little outside of the norm, I think, but, ghosts were not in the realm of acceptable things. Like one time as a teenager, I was staying alone in the house. My parents were gone, and my younger brother and sister were staying with other people. I was just staying home alone with the dog. One night, I got so scared because of the stuff that was going on. The spooks were really active, the footsteps, the knocking, all that crap. I got scared and called a girlfriend to see if I could go stay at her house that night. And do you think I would tell her parents it was because we had a ghost? No. I was just a big chicken, my imagination was running away with me. It was much better to be thought of as neurotic than to be thought of as someone who sees ghosts.
It's true, yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, still there is, even now, even with how far it's come, the people still have this thing, like, they don't want to talk about it, and then when they figure out what I do for a living, or they know that I'm open to it, all of a sudden the stories just flood out of them, because I don't think people they don't feel like they can be open about it. They feel like they're going to be ridiculed even now, and it's amazing to me that people don't want to talk about it. And it's funny because if you just start talking about it, other people have had the same experiences or different experiences, and it happens a lot too when I do workshops sometimes, and I do classes. And at first, everyone is really, really quiet, and and then I start talking about some of my experiences and stuff, and then usually I know that at least an hour of my workshop is going to be people just talking, and so I always just add it in there. So I always give myself an extra hour because I know that people are going to start asking questions and they'll start talking among themselves, because it's liberating, I guess. So, and that's what I love about what I do, is those times when I feel like I'm letting people just let go of their experiences and letting people realize this is not something that is, it's more common than you think, let's put it that way. This is not something that happens to 5% of the population. This happens to a lot of people. We all are going to be dead at some time. We're all alive now. It's all about energy. It's all about experience. And so I think that above and beyond my book and above and beyond, just ghost stories in general, I think my main purpose for doing all this stuff is really just to show people that this is just another part of your life. Death, ghosts, these sorts of things, they are really just part of the whole life experience in general. And I think we as a culture, especially in America, have forgotten that. Other cultures sort of put death into their rituals, into their life, into there's religious connotations to it, especially. And here we don't have that. Here we just bury people as fast as we can and we get it over with, and we grieve. We don't honor.
And even grieving is a lot of time. But before we go off on that,
yes.
we did have a question in the virtual auditorium.
Sure.
And what they're wondering is what you actually do. Do you write books? Do you rid houses of ghosts? What is your primary goal? And I wanted to get that one in since that happened to be where you happen to be.
Yes, I do all of it. That's the whole thing. I started out in journalism school. I went to college for journalism. But I've always lived in haunted houses, and I started really getting into the paranormal, so I kind of had that slant. Decided that I was going to write a book on it. I got a publisher. Before that, though, I was reading tarot forever, since I was about 15. So I did that for a living for a while, too, and I did the psychic stuff. And so when I started paranormal investigating, I did a lot of psychic profiling. Even though I know how to use equipment as well, I do both. And so I kind of put it all together. So now I do investigations, I do psychic profiling, I write books about it, and then I teach psychic development at the college. So it's all kind of all the same thing. To me it is. It all encompasses. When you really kind of get it, they seem like separate entities, but they're really not. It's all really the same.
They're connected.
They're all very
connected. I sort of
connected,
have a question I'm going to slide in here on you then.
Sure.
Often it's been suggested to me that certain people tend to live in haunted houses more often than other people do. Some people, their whole lives, never experience a haunting.
Right.
Even in houses that previously have been described as haunted.
Right.
Do certain people seem to cause the hauntings more than they seem to just notice the haunting?
Absolutely. There are a lot of people that don't realize it, but they do have psychokinetic energy, which means that psychokinesis is mind over matter. It basically means that you push your energy outward and you can cause things. That's what poltergeists are, or one of the theories of poltergeists.
That's what we used to blame the pots and pans flying around the kitchen. We had 3 kids going through puberty at the same time. It would always happen right after we went to sleep.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Usually when that happens, though, because it usually happens around 1 or 2 people in the house. When they leave, the activity happens. I mean, it goes away. When they're there, that's when the activity happens. But I think sometimes, too, like with my family, I come from a long line of psychics on both sides of my family. Some used to do it for a living, some don't at all. Some hide it very well. Some are lawyers. But once I started going back into the history, I realized this is not something that I just have. And we tend to live in haunted houses, not because we caused it, but just because it feels normal to us. I've always lived in a haunted house until I got to be an adult. I had always lived in a haunted house with my family. It was just something that was a given. A lot of times now, my house is my apartment now. It isn't haunted, but when I got here, there was somebody here, and I think it was someone around the neighborhood who just came to visit because I could notice them, and they needed some closure. And I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was somebody who had gotten murdered. That's the feeling I got from it. But, and then we work it out, and then they go away because okay, someone's paying attention to me. Okay, somebody knows my story kind of thing. So, again, I think that's why some people live in haunted houses and some people never experience anything. It's conditioning, it's life experience, it's whether you believe or not, too. There's been a ton of studies, scientific studies about belief. And there was a study where they did, and they gave people an ESP test, and before they asked them what their beliefs were about, sight phenomenon in general and extrasensory perception, and they found that those who believed in the phenomenon actually did better on the test because they believed it was going to happen. And so there is a correlation between belief and experience. So
maybe you believe because you have experiences, too.
Exactly. So if you're open to the phenomenon, you're more likely to experience it than those who are highly skeptical. It's just a fact. It's just how our brain works. So to answer the question in a very broad, general, long-winded way, yes, people can bring on their own experiences, and yes, certain people will have more experiences in houses.
Another question, I've often heard it said that objects can have spirits attached to them.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And that sometimes some really negative entities, especially associated with the vacuum tubes that were used in old radios and whatnot,
yeah,
that negative entities would sometimes get trapped in them.
Well, I've never heard it that way, but that's the whole basis of psychometry, which is just another aspect of clairvoyance. It's just touch-based. But energy you can actually put energy into objects. Most people do it without even realizing, especially like rings or keepsakes, things that are handed down from generation to generation. There's energy that gets trapped in there. I have heard of a lot of cases where spirits get caught into objects, and so you bring in something from the thrift store, and then all of a sudden your house is haunted. There's been lots of cases like that. Old museums. I think part of the reason why the birdcage in Tombstone is so haunted, and it is haunted. I've investigated it 3 times. I think a lot of it has to do with there's a whole bunch of relics in there, from the 1800s, and that energy, you can go through the cases and you can just feel the energy coming off of those things. I'm sure that helps. so, but I've never heard of the vacuum tube. That's very interesting.
I've had several people talk about old radios and old phonographs.
That makes sense. I mean, the first EVPs were actually, caught on phonographs and old radios and stuff like that. So I could totally see how the correlation is there, but I haven't heard anything specifically on that.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the bird cage. Another guest I'd had on here by the name of Washali should come on. I had actually made a trip to the Myrtles here in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is supposed to be very, very haunted.
Yes.
Well, beforehand, I happened to be a little heavy on research and whatnot. I'd researched the story of the Myrtles.
Uh-huh.
Well, it turns out that this ghost that supposedly haunts the Myrtles was invented in the 50s, and there's no historical evidence to suggest she ever existed.
That happens a lot. Yeah.
And the people she supposedly murdered the children she supposedly murdered died as adults. And
okay.
It didn't die there. And so, none of the story was jiving.
Right.
And, yet at the same time, we've all seen the pictures of the ghost and whatnot, because they're fairly easy to find on the Internet.
Right.
But I thought, okay, we'll go ahead and go visit. And we took their ghost tour after dark, and I was a little disappointed in it. It was not anywhere as interesting as the other tours I'd taken in various places in terms of history or even spook value. Maybe I took fun out of it by doing the research, and I knew the story was total BS.
Right.
But it really wasn't that interesting. I didn't even like the house. The house, it was like walking into a house that people had a big argument in.
Mm-hmm.
It was that kind of
the tense energy.
Yeah, and the haunted mirror, and the whole bit was just kind of hokey. Anyhow, afterwards, I was taking photographs outside, and like a number of other people. There was one girl, she had a brand new, very expensive digital camera, and it was just malfunction after malfunction. It was doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So her and I talked back and forth, and we're just walking around taking a few pictures and whatnot. And I took pictures of, just as I was leaving, I took pictures of the porch, and there was nobody on the porch. And in one picture, you can see there was a guy off to my left, and the same girl with the malfunction camera was off to my right. But there's two entities on the porch that I know weren't there.
Wow.
And then there's a picture that was taken right after that one where one of the entities has moved forward.
Right.
And I was moving, towards to leave the area. I was getting ready to leave. And I didn't see him, in the little digital display. I didn't see these things in the picture. I didn't see him until I got home later that night, and I loaded them on the computer.
Right.
So anyhow, I asked Greg, I said, Greg, do you remember a small black person hanging around anywhere? Because it would have been like, this person would have been like 4.5 feet tall, noticeably small.
Right.
And he's like, no. I said, well, do you remember a really fat woman or a really pregnant woman? He's like, no. And I actually have the pictures are up on the website if anybody wants to go take a look and see what I'm talking about. And so I put up the pictures on the website, and we talked about it. Well, comparing it to pictures, I'd been there earlier in the day, and I'd taken a number of pictures in the same courtyard. You compare the daytime pictures from various angles to places where these things were. One was standing beside a rocking chair on the porch. Anybody could have been standing there, but that person I know was not there. And I've blown them up and all sorts of things trying to get a better look, and no, you can't get any distinguishing features at all.
Right.
And on the second one, the one that appears to be a very fat woman or a very pregnant woman, she was walking what appeared to be right between the trees and the porch, right there. It's physically impossible to walk through there. Trees are too close, porch railing's too high, so forth and so on. Fat or skinny, it wouldn't make any difference. There's no way she could have been there.
Mm-hmm.
But, the photograph shows her there twice. Not just once, but twice.
Right.
Same, they were taken like probably 30 seconds apart at the most. And, what they were, I don't know. Now, just because the ghost story is hokey doesn't mean that Myrtles isn't haunted.
Right. This is true. The other aspect of that, which is very interesting in itself, is the idea that we do it to ourselves. And
yeah, now I very much regret I didn't get that girl's name, because I would love to contact her, because she was taking pictures at the same time.
Yeah.
On the same porch, on the same, she had to have caught them too, if they were real.
Right. The other aspect of that, though, is there are, okay, I'm gonna mention Tombstone again in another place. There's this place in Sao Paulo. It's called the Glen Tavern Inn. It's a hotel. It's reportedly haunted. And then also there's the Big Nose Capes in Tombstone, reportedly haunted. Okay, there's a story of the swamper at Big Nose Capes. Well, I found out that they made it up. It's not real. There's no ghost there. They made it up because it's a cool story. And if you really go back and look at the history of the place, there was nobody. It couldn't even happen. From it's so made up. Once you figure out the history, it doesn't make any sense. Same with the Glen Tavern Inn. There was an old cowboy that supposedly shot somebody in a room with a card game. Well, there were no cowboys at that time that stayed there in the time frame, so there's no possible way it could have happened. However, both places, the story has been told so many times over so many years that people really believe it. So there's all these stories of the swamper, and there's all these pictures of the swamper, and people getting pushed, because the main thing is he pushed people down the stairs. So people talk about being pushed all the time. In this one room at the Glen Tavern Inn, people see this ghost all the time. Lisa Williams saw the ghost walking down the hallway, even though it's not real. In the Glen Tavern Inn. But she encountered it, and she actually communicated with it, which I thought was very interesting. I think what happens, either one of two things happens. Either you've got spirits who come in and play the role because they know that people will pay attention to them, or the other idea is the idea of group consciousness. You expect it to happen, you believe it's going to happen, you put your own energy into it, and then eventually you create your own thought form. And so now we have a place where hundreds and hundreds of people visiting have put in their energy, have talked about this story, and have made it real. So is it just a conglomeration of all these people thinking about it and making it? I mean, there are all kinds of studies on group consciousness and how it works. And I have a psychic circle that we practice every week. We practice telepathy and all kinds of stuff. And one of the things we've been practicing with is dice. We all think of the same number on the dice, and we throw them to see how many times we can get the same numbers on all the dice. We find that when we're really, really paying attention, we can manipulate the dice more so than not. If somebody is thinking, we tried it last week, where somebody else was thinking of a different number, usually the number that the person that's thinking about that's against us usually comes up before the number that we're thinking. So there is something to the idea of group consciousness and people putting their own energy to manipulate something. So that is another idea. So you can you can have a place that's not haunted, tell a ghost story, and get people to believe it, and you will get evidence from that ghost, even though it never really existed. I actually did an experiment a few years ago in 2007 with a friend of mine who's a documentarian, and we actually made up a ghost, did a circle, like in the pagan style. We made a circle, we talked about the ghost, we all put aspects of it. We made sure that it wasn't a real person. We put historical inaccuracies in it on purpose. And we did a convention a week later, and we told people that this was a ghost, and we published it in some of the literature that was actually passed around 2 years later, somebody took a picture of the ghost that we had made. We have gotten EVPs. We have gotten evidence of this person that didn't exist. So there's something to that. There's something to ghost stories. There's something to the idea of belief.
And here's a question for you.
Sure.
Have you ever visited, you live in an area with lots of ruins, dating from pre-Columbian times
Yes.
all the way up to the missions from the Spaniards.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever visited any of the ruins? I
have, yes.
And have you noticed any peculiarities about some of them?
Oh, yes, definitely. Especially Sedona. Sedona has some weird, intense Indian energy. Especially, some of the ruins there are very weird, and there's some out here too. But yeah, definitely, there's a definitely strange energy to it.
Well, I was just curious because I had visited a mission ruin. I've been to lots of ruins, pre-Columbian on. But,
yeah.
with my grandmother, my mother, and my kids, I visited this mission ruins. I think it's in Mountain Air, New Mexico. And we've been walking around. This is, a pretty low-key place. There's not a lot of staff. There's not a lot of visitors.
Right.
Sort of out in the middle of nowhere. My grandmother had been there a number of times. And her and my mother had sat down on a bench, and I had continued walking. And there's so few people there that even though my son's only 4 years old, he's kind of allowed to roam quite a bit.
Right.
And so I'm way ahead of the kids. And I walk into the old church itself, and I walk in from where the doors had originally been. And I walk in, and it's like, ooh, I call it like an emotional stain, not really a ghost, but it was like, most people who came through those doors were not real happy to be here. And it was uncomfortable enough, I just kind of left. Sort of like a bad odor or something is the only way I can describe it. It's not a ghost, it's just that this place doesn't have a real good feeling. And I leave, and I'm going outside, and I'm just dinking around looking at other stuff, and the next one come along is my daughter, who at that time is 12.
Wow.
And she walks in, and she makes it maybe 2 strides from the door, and she stops. She kind of looks around, and she leaves. Well, here comes Bebop and the hyperactive 4-year-old that, everybody swears doesn't pay attention to anything. He takes maybe 2 steps into there. He stops, looks around. He leaves. Now, I hadn't said anything to him about the place in general. They've just been allowed to kind of explore on their own.
Right.
And I especially hadn't said anything about how that particular room made me feel. But it was kind of strange to watch both the kids, who are at very different stages of maturity and cognitive abilities and whatnot, react essentially the same.
Right. To
the same place as I did. And, I would say there's some places that are kind of like that. I've been to some ruins on mesas that are just certain portions of them. It's like a feeling of awe, or sometimes it just feel good to be there. And other places it's like, I don't want to be here. So there's a wide variety of feelings, and I said it's like an emotional stain. You get a general sense, I guess, of strong emotion.
Yeah, they usually call it's called a residual haunting or place memory. It's basically that you're tapping into the energy of the place. It's nothing that has a brain. You know what I mean? It can't interact with you.
Right.
But it does, like you said, it leaves a stain on the place. It changes the structure of how the place feels. And so when people, it's fun just to watch people who...
Well, apparently my grandmother was aware of it because she never went in the sanctuary at all.
Right. But it's just funny to watch people sometimes when you're aware that a place is haunted and they're not, and certain places they won't go to, or they just have that look on their face and they just look uncomfortable. Because I think we pick up on it way more than we even realize. Subconsciously we do.
Uh-huh.
So.
Well, you'll often hear something, people say, oh, that just feels like a good place. And I have to admit, okay, I'm not going to make very many people very happy with this statement. I never liked Sedona. I did not like to be in Sedona. Now, Oak Creek Canyon I like. Some of the areas around Sedona I like. Sedona itself, I normally would get a headache and I'd want to leave. And it was consistent because I lived where it was, it was an hour and a half away.
Okay.
I could visit Sedona all the time,
Yeah.
I did not like it. Jerome, on the other hand, Jerome was one of those places that it had a playful sort of mood to it. But
yeah,
Sedona, I never liked it. Never did.
Yeah, I talk about that in my book. The first time I went to Sedona, I had a really, really off-putting feeling about it. I felt the same way you did. And, I went back a second time, and it didn't bother me as much because I knew what I was getting myself into. But it's interesting because it is hyped as this metaphysical mecca, where things happen spiritually. And I didn't find that I found this very off-putting, very negative feeling. I felt like, wow, Indians died here. There's bloodshed. How can anybody like this feeling? And I find that that's partly why Sedona is such a spiritual mecca in hindsight, because it is a very extreme balance of positive and negative energy, so you can tap into either side, depending where you are in your life or how you're feeling at the time. And the way that I read is that I always pick up on the most intense energy and I work backwards. So I don't get things in chronological order. I get them in sort of snippets from, so whatever the most extreme thing is. And so for me, death by bloodshed, arguments would be a point of extremeness that I would probably pick up on first. And so when I was in Sedona, that's what I read. I read all of this carnage, and then after that, then all the other stuff happened, and so I was sort of overwhelmed by the idea of it. But again, when I went back the second time, it was a little more intriguing to me because I had that experience, I was able to sort of filter it out and then find the other aspects of the place. And there are some really, really beautiful energies there. You just have to find them, and it's not my
I usually didn't get very far off the beaten path because usually I didn't last very long.
Yeah, again, it's not one of my favorite places on the world. Like, there's other places that I find to be much more satisfying. I love Pisces, so I really like water, and that's what calms me down. The sort of trapped feeling you get with those high walls in Sedona kind of make me feel claustrophobic. So it's not my favorite place in the world, but it is haunted, so.
Yeah, well, like the vortex, okay?
Uh-huh.
I paid a visit to the vortex, and I have to admit, this is, assuming I was at the right place. Everybody said it's off the airport road. That's the one I went to. And, I've been told, no, that's not the right place. It's really someplace else. But the one I went to, I was told, was the vortex was off the airport road.
Right, yeah.
And you get there and you park and you hike up to the top of this dusty hill, just like a lot of other dusty hills in the Sedona area. And we get up there, and I was actually with one of my aunts, and we get up to the top of the hill. And there was a woman who was there with her family, and she had a very strong accent. And she was informing her family she could feel it bumping her and stuff. And my aunt has zero belief in anything paranormal, okay?
Right.
And even the fact that she said, oh, yeah, I'll go with you, kind of floored me because, like I said, she has zero belief in any of it. And so we're hanging off to the side of the hill, and we're talking about whatever and looking at the view. Well, they're doing their thing, over there with whatever bumping them. And then this family leaves, and my aunt looks at me, she says, you go first because I don't want it bumping me. All right, so I'm like, okay, and we go to this center of the hill, and somebody's put down some flagstones there. And she says, anything bumping you? And I said, oh. Now, I've been to other vortexes, and you can actually see it changes the growth of trees, and it's noticeable. There wasn't anything noticeable here. And I'm kind of like, this feels just like the other part of the hill did. I mean, nothing real. I've been to many more spiritual places than this, you know. And I'm like, well, this, you know, it's not that impressive. Well, a woman comes back to tell me how to feel it bumping me too. And, you know, nothing bumped me. I didn't feel anything special up there. Like I said, I've been to many other places that were fewer tourists at and were much more spiritual than this one. So I found that rather disappointing, but that was long, you know, it wasn't all that many years before I left Arizona, actually. So I had been to Sedona many, many, many times before that and had never gone to the vortex until then. But yeah, I was disappointed in the vortex because, like I said, always before you could tell because they do affect the growth of trees and whatnot in the area, and this one didn't seem to have any effect on the plants that live there at all.
Yeah, there are places. I mean, I have to agree with you. There are places that are way more spiritual, and I think just going back on the history, the reason, I mean, Sedona wasn't really considered a spiritual mecca until the 80s, so it hasn't had this title for very long. It's only, you know, almost 30 years now, I think, maybe 87, 86. So, yeah. So it's a new thing, and I think that's part of it, too, is that it really is new.
Well,
I mean, before that, it
has been commercialized.
Yeah, it's...
But speaking of commercialized,
okay, go ahead.
It's time for us to take a break. So, folks, do stay tuned to the Donna Shades, and we'll be right back. And while we're gone from your computer, take a look at our website, www.exogenetwork.com. And we will be right back with Heather Woodward, our guest tonight. Host Gia Scott with our guest, Heather Woodward. And once again, I would like to remind everyone to visit our website, www.exogenetwork.com. You can sign up for the newsletter or wander around, explore the website. Let me know what you think of it. There are links there to take you to blog, Twitter, and Facebook, too. If you want to go straight to the blog, you can go to giascott.wordpress.com, and you can find out all kinds of things that I'm up to lately. And if you have a question that you wish to have asked, you can email it to me at giascott@exogenetwork.com. I am monitoring the email during the program with Heather, and I'm trying real hard not to miss anything. Now, Heather, we were talking about also on Sedona before the break, weren't we?
Yes.
Yeah, I have to admit that, you know, I visited Sedona before it became a spiritual mecca.
Yes.
It was a much nicer town then. Okay, that's a bad thing to say.
I'm not surprised.
But it was. It was a cool place then. And it's not so cool now.
No, it's
really
commercialized. I have to say
yeah.
it is. There's a lot of pretentiousness there. I'm not gonna lie, and it's definitely if you can get away from the people, it is. The one thing I noticed about Bell Rock, people always say that they have all these experiences there that are so profound, and I was like, how can you have profound experiences when there's helicopters, you know, doing the tours, and there's people there all the time? I mean, it's always so crazy there. So I imagine that when it's quiet, like at 3 in the morning, maybe you can have a profound experience, or maybe on the weekday when it's a little more quiet. But yeah, it's sort of touristy now, which is good. I guess it's good for them, but it's.
In fact, I blame because my early visits, you know, in the 70s and the first half of the 80s even, they weren't unpleasant. I didn't get headaches. I didn't have this urge to escape. I can remember walking down the main drag and crossing the street between crosswalks. Try doing that now. You'd be mowed down.
It's true. And last time I was there, they were doing road work, and they had all these roundabouts, and oh my gosh, I was so confused. I was like, I've been here before. Why can't I figure out where I am? You know, it's not a fun town if you don't like roundabouts. So
yeah. Well, the only place I'd like to go and I was told that it actually flooded. A place called Tlaquepaque.
Okay.
And they had some really neat galleries in there, and
I know what
we
you're
would
talking
often
about.
go to the Mexican food restaurant there.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. So cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very cool.
Yeah. I always enjoyed that place because I love the brass statues that they would have all over the place.
Yeah, it's really pretty. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are nice places there. There are haunted locations there. I mean, I mostly talked about the Vortex because I thought they were so fascinating because I'm from California, and not that I never heard of it, I just never really gave it much thought because it wasn't near me.
Well, I have some friends that live in Sedona. I have some friends who think of Sedona as it's bigger than Mecca, to be honest. Okay, to them. And you know, they sort of regard me as like really an infidel in their cause. But I was not impressed with Sedona. I've never had a burning desire to live there. I could rather go hang out in Camp Verde for fun, you know. Jerome's a fun town. Even in the 70s, it was kind of a hippie town then because there was nobody there, and properties were falling apart, and it was cheap, and a lot of artsy people moved there, and it was a cool place to visit then. And I have to admit, I probably haven't been there in 20 years now, but I always loved going to Jerome. You know, and this tells you how long ago we used to go. We'd all load up in the back of the pickup truck. Yeah.
Well, if you ever want to go to just in central Arizona or the northern central Arizona, if you ever want to go somewhere that is just haunted, Jerome is the place. I mean, there's not too many places that aren't haunted in Jerome. And it's a fascinating place to me. It's, you know, it's a mile up in the air, you know, it's a mile up in the air, and it's so small, and the buildings are literally sliding down the hill.
Yeah, literally, the whole town's sliding down the hill.
Sliding down the hill, and you can still see the mine is still there. It has to be maintained. So you can actually, we found some of the roads that go up into not into the mines, but around the mines, you know. You can just park and look at them, and I just found the whole place to be fascinating and very haunted. I mean, there's just some great places. If you ever want to stay at a real haunted hotel, the Jerome Grand actually is very haunted. I mean, I've been to lots of hotels that are purportedly haunted, and then they're not, and I'm always like, dude. But the Jerome Grand is very haunted.
La Posada is supposed to be very haunted, and I was told there was all sort of satanic symbols.
Where? Which one?
La Posada in Winslow. It was last Harvey House.
Yes.
It was
yeah. Okay. I just talked about. Yeah.
Okay, and there's supposed to be all these satanic and Masonic symbols and blah 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 blah. Now, when I was there, we toured the place and we had dinner there and everything, and that was where my mother had announced I was a ghost magnet, and surprised me half to death because I didn't remember being a ghost magnet. But we never saw ghosts. But they had the weirdest artwork I have ever seen.
Huh.
Now, this predates the drug culture, but it had to be produced by maybe the morphine culture. I don't know. Because I'm like, this is so weird. I mean, creepy weird. I don't remember the specific topics in it. There was a central theme. I'm thinking cards appeared in it or something. Something oddball appeared in all the paintings. But it was just so weird. It was like this was created by an insane mind. I mean, it really was. And it was weird in a somewhat creepy way. If anything was haunted to me that day that we toured it, it had to be the paintings.
The paintings, okay, yeah. So
because they were weird, and I didn't like them. It had a yucky feeling to it. It's the only way I could put it. I didn't like the paintings. Outside of that, we must have missed the ballroom because I don't remember it at all. And supposedly the ballroom is where all these satanic symbols are supposed to be.
Ballrooms are always haunted. That's part of the I guess the mythology of ghost stories. Ballrooms are always haunted, and there's always a lady in white in any large hotel. So I mean, you'll find those. And I just sort of laugh about it because I know that usually when I'm looking up history, I'm going to find a lady in white. And 90% of hotels that are more than 100 years old, you know. So,
maybe the lady in white is because most women wore white in the summertime and white nightgowns, and white is an easy color to manifest.
I think so, and I think partly too it's because there are so many stories. I mean, I actually looked up the Lady in White, the whole, like, the myth behind it, like, where it came from, and it comes from folklore. It actually comes from Europe. But, and I think what happened was it started to travel, people started traveling to the America, and by train and stuff, and by ship, and you know, we had lots and lots of immigrants in the 1800s, especially with the whole, people started mining here, and that brought people over in droves, and that mythology just came with it. I mean, there are so many stories about ladies in white, and what it was is it was usually someone who their husband killed her, or she was cheated on, and so she said, I'm going to come back and haunt you, and she does, stuff like that. And so I think that has a lot to do with it, too, that we just, now we see them in hotels because those stories are so prevalent. But, yeah, and I think you're probably right, too, where the white was just a really basic color that people, especially in the summers, I'm sure. So, yeah, it's very interesting. You know, they always come with, like, lavender or rose perfume. I mean, that's really common. They're usually French. I don't know why. They're perfume women. They're, sometimes they are ladies of the night. But, yeah, you can always find those, and I think that's intriguing. But,
now, another story that I know is very, very common in Arizona, I've not heard any versions of it in Louisiana, and we have way more water here, is the Ulona.
Yes, I ran across a few of those, actually. Actually, there's one in Jerome. And I wrote about it, because I was like, oh, my God, there's so many versions of this story. There's actually...
Well, she haunts every river in
yes.
Arizona and in Mexico, every body of water, every canal.
And it's the whole idea that there must have been a ton of children that were drowned, because she always drowns 3 or 4 children in every story. So, I mean, if you exponentially put that together, I mean, those are hundreds of children. But, yeah, I mean, there is a story in Jerome about that, about the woman who drowned her children in the river.
Well, it makes you wonder, you know, over time, because we've heard cases where mothers have, you know, in the last decade, have killed their children, and it horrifies us. Now, women in general find the stories particularly horrific because, in general, women tend to be nurturers.
Right.
We're hardwired to be like that. We're not supposed to drown our offspring.
Right.
Even though sometimes when they're teenagers, we wonder why we didn't drown our offspring. We're not supposed to.
Yeah, so
At the same time, there is that saying that sometimes you're like, I should have had puppies, you know, and drowned them all. Because it is teenagers, they are difficult. So, you know, maybe that is part of why, you know, mothers often, you know, feel guilty because they deeply resent their children and their children's behavior at some point in their life. The postpartum depression thing, which makes it very hard to bond with children sometimes. And in those freak instances where mothers do kill their children, those stories would stick around. And you know, as a kid, the first time I heard this story, because I didn't grow up in Arizona, so when we would visit family there, my cousins liked to scare me. And this monster woman that you couldn't see in the daytime was going to sneak up behind me and scratch an X on my back, and I was going to die.
Oh, wow.
You could see her at night, but in the daytime you couldn't see her. So you had to stay way away from the water. You know, and I was like, I don't know what is that, the X scratching, and I've heard that periodically, the scratching of the X on your back.
Yes, I've heard that.
That's just, to me, that's weird for a ghost to do.
I think it's, I have seen it. I actually was in a house where somebody was actually grabbed, and you could see the bruise happen. And it's a very strange phenomenon, and you're like, okay, how did that happen? Did they do that themselves, or was that really a ghost? I mean, it's an interesting phenomenon, to say the least. I can't tell you what it is, though. Those are one of those things where you're like, oh, okay, dude. I've seen the scratches, too, where they're real scratches. You can't fake that, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
It's a very, I don't know. Some of the stuff that I've encountered like that, I just, you go, okay, I know it happened, but then, you know, you go back and months go by and you're like, did that really happen? You know what I mean? So I always try to question it after the fact, which I think is so silly because, I believe.
As a kid growing up in our haunted houses, my mother just kept telling us a ghost can't hurt you. You hurt yourself by reacting with fear. Now I'm kind of to the point where, I think some ghosts can hurt you.
They can, yeah. I mean, fear is a major factor. If you live in a haunted house, the worst thing you can do is be afraid of it because your energy does add to the momentum
of it. In addition, you're apt to do something where you do hurt yourself. Fall down the stairs because you're afraid of the thing behind you or in front of you or whatever.
Exactly. But
drop things and whatnot.
I think ghosts can hurt you, though. I have to say, I've had things thrown at me. I've had a flashlight fly across the room. I've had rocks thrown at me. I've been pushed backwards. I was told not to go over a threshold, and I ignored it. It's actually here in Tucson. And I ignored it, and I picked up my foot to walk, and I was wearing flats. Fell right over. My sister was behind me, thank God, because if I hadn't have fallen on her, I would have hit my head. So, I mean, there is some danger to this, I'm not going to lie. You just have to be careful, I think, and just know that you're dealing with something that we really don't understand. I mean, there's no way that you can really quantify this stuff in a laboratory because how do you do that? You know what I mean? So it's hard. It's hard to predict it. It's hard to know what it is. And once we think we have a theory, there's always something that messes it up. So there's always exceptions to the rule in that case. But
yeah, because I have cautioned friends, where they've encountered things that seem to be particularly negative, that perhaps fooling around with it, sometimes they'll claim to be demons and whatnot, and I'm like, I don't know if there's demons or not, but you're fooling around with some stuff that I'm not sure it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think the thing with demons, and no, demons are really popular right now because of TV shows and stuff. I have yet to experience demonic energy. I have experienced some really pissed off ghosts and some really pissed off people. You got to remember, and I always tell people this, if you're a pissy person in life, if you're just a dick, you're going to be a dick as a ghost. I mean, there's transcendence and evolution and stuff, but for the most part, you pretty much take on your personality with you. So a lot of these things that people consider negative entities are probably just pissed off people. And I find that. Or the other thing is that they're being psychokinetic and they're creating their own negative energy because they're not expressing it, so it comes out as negative. The entity case was thought to be actually psychokinesis. But, and she was, she was doing all kinds of stuff. Yeah, so, I mean, you have to be really careful when you throw around words like demonic because and the whole idea of demonic, too, is a very religious thing. And
right.
So it's you got to be careful with that, too, because you're adding this whole undertow of religious theology on top of the paranormal, which, not that I don't think that they coexist, but you have to be careful because if you really look up demonology and you really study it, it is a very religious idea. So is it real? We don't know.
Last fall, I think it was, we actually had a couple of guests on the program that deliberately induce demonic possessions, which is kind of a strange idea for most of us to swallow. To deliberately invite such a thing sounds a little risky to me still. Even after doing the interview, I'm like, I'm not sure this is a really good idea. I don't think I'm going to take this up as a hobby,
Were they doing it contained in a circle, or how were they doing it? Just out of curiosity.
I can't really tell you that. But yeah, I think they were doing some sort of a circle. But they were actually, not only them, but other people would actually be literally possessed by these spirits. And I find that a little frightening. I tend to be somewhat of a control freak, I think. The idea of yielding control of my body to somebody else is not real attractive to me.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, there's plenty of channelers out there that are, trance mediums and stuff who do that, and it was very popular in the 70s when I was born, and in the early 80s, and people still do it. But I think I would never do it, and not because I can't, it's because I won't. It's just the idea of something foreign coming into my body and using it. I don't think that's really what our bodies are made for.
Yeah, I mean, channeling, from what I understand, channeling, you're not really possessed. It's more like it's psychic connection where, they're communicating through you.
Right, but sometimes they do invite them in, and that's an aspect of it. You can choose not to or to. But some, not going to say all, some do want, some do the actual channeling, and I just find it to be very evasive, and I find it to be, like I said, I don't think our bodies are really made for that. I don't think our bodies are made to handle that kind of energy. And I think that you risk all kinds of health issues later when you do that. I mean, there are so many, even psychic, even if you're not attuned, I think everybody's psychic, but when you're first doing it, you really have to meditate a lot, and you really have to take precautions because, and you really have to know your body because, I mean, I've seen so many readers who don't prepare their body for it, and they get diabetes, and they get all these other, things later on in life because they're taking on all of that energy, and they're not expelling it. They're not cleaning out their chakras. They're not cleaning out their energy systems. And so that's part of it, too. I always tell people, if you're going to be in the paranormal world or you're going to do psychic stuff or you're going to work with energy in general, even if you're healing people, even like Reiki, make sure you have some sort of psychic self-defense, and make sure you clean your energies over and over again. Make sure you're cleaning out your chakras. Make sure you're doing meditation. Make sure you're taking baths in sea salt, and these sorts of things that sound so silly, but they really do help.
Well, you're kind of hitting on some issues because not everybody wants to practice being psychic. For a lot of people, it's part of who they are. It's like the color of their eyes. They may not do it, frequently. They may not do it deliberately, but it occurs. These things just happen to them on a random basis. Is it important for them as well to work at sort of cleaning out their energy system and making sure that they stay in tune with themselves and the world around them?
Not really, because they're not using it on an everyday basis. It's like a runner. A runner has to go and run every day. But at the same time, if you use a runner, somebody who doesn't run and then takes up weekend warrior running, right,
gives themselves a heart attack.
Exactly. It's the same thing. It really is a muscle that you have to use, and it's just like anything else. I mean, runners, athletes, they have to eat a special diet. They really prepare themselves, for whatever sport they're going to play. It's the same thing with this kind of stuff. I mean, even paranormal investigating, there is a level of that. People think Ouija boards are bad, but you know what? Sitting in a dark room with an EMF detector and asking a spirit to communicate with you, it's kind of precarious. You're really opening the door for whatever wants to come in to communicate with you, and you just have to be careful with that kind of stuff. I think, this is just my opinion, but I feel like you have to really be careful because you have to know how to protect yourself from that kind of stuff. What if something negative comes through? And it does, I'm not going to lie. I mean, there are plenty of times especially I've investigated sanitariums, and you're in mental hospitals, and there's not a lot of good energy in those places, and you have to really be careful because, you are inviting those sorts of energies towards you to communicate with you. So, I always, I try to get people to, at least, the very least, smudge yourself after you go on investigation, before and after, just so you're not taking anything home with you, I always tell people, if you're scared, think of the white light. You know, project that white light energy around you. I know these are kind of new agey things, but they do work. And
well, part of it is, and you mentioned there again, bringing things home with you.
Yes.
We weren't on a paranormal investigation. We were just on a lark, you might say, doing the touristy sort of thing, and visited an old cemetery. And one person in particular out of the group seemed to have a great deal of trouble afterwards, and he was firmly convinced that something had come home with him.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there again, we weren't doing a paranormal investigation. We weren't intending anything paranormal. But, you know, and probably in hindsight, looking at the group, there was a fair amount of potential psychic energy in that group, because all of them had very paranormal experiences in their life already.
Right.
You know, and so, you know, for people like that, even seemingly innocent activities, you know, my perception is that they are potentially just as much at risk, or possibly even more so, because their lack of awareness in certain aspects.
Yes, exactly.
They may be at as much or more risk as someone who does it regularly. And that these people in particular perhaps should consider, because they're like the weekend warrior athlete. You know, they're more likely to get injured, and sort of these people who aren't deliberately trying to invite paranormal activity or investigate it or even participate in it, but become unwitting athletes in a sense. You know, that maybe they should consider, you know, meditation and smudging and some basic stuff. What would you recommend for them?
I think awareness is always key. People tend to try to rationalize things, and I do it too. And so if something weird is happening to you and it feels off, then there's something happening to you. So I think awareness is key. I think a lot of times just being aware that it can happen to you. Not that everyone should be afraid of it, but some people are just more open. And just be aware of it and say, okay, something might be happening to me. I encourage everybody who's listening, and I always tell people this, meditate, practice meditation. There are so many good things that happen. Even when you meditate like 10 minutes a day, you don't have to do the whole Zen thing. You don't have to do the whole Eastern philosophy of meditation. Nowadays they have CDs, they have guided meditations. They take 7 minutes, 10 minutes. A lot of the meditations I do are less than 20 minutes because I just don't have the patience. But, I mean, there are so many ways to meditate now. And, I mean, scientifically, there are lots of studies that show that meditation is great for cognitive processing. It's great for dreaming. It helps. I mean, they don't know this for sure, but there are studies that show that it could possibly keep your memory so that you don't get Alzheimer's and stuff like that, or what's it called, dementia. Because it helps keep you focused and aware, and it helps with memory, and it helps
maintain your cognitive skills.
Yes, it does.
Yeah,
it does all of that, and it's so easy these days. I mean, people think of the Eastern philosophy, which is really coming to the blank mind, but it's very unrealistic for most people to get to that state, and I rarely get there. So, and I've been doing this for years. So, again, like, there's lots of, if you go online, there are tons of ways to do it. One of the coolest things I have is I actually have a video that you put on for 10 minutes, and it goes through the chakras, and you watch it on your television, and the music focuses you, and it clears out your chakras in 9.5 minutes. And when I don't have a lot of time, I do that because it's just easy. I just pop it in real quick. Okay, gotta go. And the music plays in your head during the day, and so it keeps you focused. So, I mean, that's the one thing I would tell everybody, just because it's simple.
Yeah, you earlier you mentioned that you were a Pisces and that you found water to be useful for meditation and whatnot.
I do, yes.
I used to not put much stock in astrology in general, but I have to admit, some of the characteristics, I happen to be an Aries, and some of the characteristics associated with Aries, I have to confess, And when you're talking about meditation and whatnot, my favorite thing always has been fire, a candle, campfire, whatever. And Aries, of course, is a fire sign. And you mentioned that you have a water sign, and water happens to be yours.
Yes.
And you run across that sort of correlation often.
I do, yes. And you don't have to believe in it, really. Horoscopes are fun, but I do astrology, and I just do the bare bones stuff. But and I just know a lot of astrologers, and I just find that most people, if you look at your chart, you are pretty much, as far as just the earth, air, fire, water, just generally that really does come across. There's some correlation there. Like my mom is definitely an earth sign, and she loves going out into the woods. She loves quiet cabins. That's where she feels safest. For me, give me a lake. Great, the ocean. I take baths. I don't take showers because I really like the idea of immersing myself, and I think really well in water too. So if I'm stressed or I'm having a blockage, I usually go take a bath, and then by the time I'm done, I'm like, oh, I got it. So for you it's fire. So probably candles are awesome.
Talking about your psychic practice with dice. Ours was playing with a candle flame.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You make the flame get tall and skinny, and you make the flame get short and squat. I did it with my kids too.
Yep. It's a form of scrying, but it's definitely you should really work within your element. Literally.
And there again, it wasn't something that I necessarily believed in. That was just my nature. I like the candle for meditating. I like the campfire for meditating. Now, I don't like big fires. I'll admit that. It's just like water. I like water just fine. Do I have a desire? I live right by the Gulf of Mexico. Even without the oil slick, do I have a desire to go swimming in it? Oh, no. That's big water. I don't like to, I can swim just fine. I grew up spending the summers in Minnesota on the lake. I could swim across the lake, and I did it many times. Do I have a special affinity for water? Not really. I just as soon never get beyond my knees in it. I don't like big water. I don't like a lot of water. Maybe that's part of the desert thing, too. When you're in a canyon and you hear that roar up the canyon and you start scrambling up the side and barely make it before the wall of water comes.
Yeah.
And places where, log jams are 50, 100 feet up in the air, and how many bodies have been retrieved out of that in the past.
Yeah, that's not...
You tend to not be real thrilled with water. And maybe, it's partly desert thing, or maybe it is partly astrology. I don't know. But I don't really care for water. And, my kids, one learned to swim at 4 months. Okay, she was a fish. She happens to be a Leo, but she was a fish from day one. The other one screamed through every bath he had. He fell off a dock when he was 3 and almost drowned. He swallowed a lot of water, and I was right there, But in that few seconds it took me to get him fished out, he swallowed a lot of water.
Oh my gosh.
And he'd been refusing to learn to swim. It wasn't until that incident happened that he agreed to learn to try to swim, because he couldn't even dog paddle. And I found that just terrific. He's 3 years old, he can't swim a lick,
Right.
And he did finally, he did learn to swim, but did he really like the water? No, but he was also an Aries.
Yeah, it makes sense.
He hated the water. And he hated it. He just absolutely detested it.
As much of the stuff is considered new age or whatever you want to call it, there is some truth to it. Astrology has been around forever. Our ancestors used to use stars, for all kinds of stuff. So there is some truth to it. It's not all true, and some of it is for fun, but, a lot of it does ring.
Well, I have to admit, there's certain stereotypical characteristics that go with Aries, and I happen to possess many of them. I really can't argue it. Nobody can say that I'm not a little bit on the stubborn side, and I'm not a little bit on the opinionated side. I've often been told I have all the tact of the average bulldozer. But, you know, as long as I remember that I'm not the most tactful person, and sometimes just shutting my mouth is the best way to be tactful. Yeah, you know, I try not to go through life without bulldozing too many people over. But, yeah, I find it interesting that so often, so many of those characteristics are true. And it's not 100%. You know, oftentimes, you know, your partner will turn out to be a sign that traditionally would be completely incompatible with you. Well, you know, when you explore it in depth, perhaps they have influencing characteristics in their personal birth chart that changes that lack of compatibility into a compatibility.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it really depends on a lot. It's not just your son.
Right. And I have learned enough to know that I don't know that much. Am I into astrology? No. I have a vague idea of what a birth chart is. That's about it. Yeah. So, yeah, and it is. It's much more complicated than the newspaper bit.
It is. You know, horoscopes are just very generalized. Again, astrology is different. I mean, I took some classes and I know how to do charts. I know how to make them, and I know how to do them on the computer. I'm not like some of these. You know, I know some astrologers are just like awesome. They can tell you everything just by looking at your chart. I'm not like that, so it's not my main modality. But I do find there is some truth to it, and you know, that's everything. That's the paranormal in general and supernatural. This kind of, you know, divination in all its many forms. There's something to it. I mean, I read tarot all the time, and people are always so afraid of it, you know. And I'm like, why are you afraid of it? All I'm doing is pulling cards and pulling your energy. Really, it's just a focus. So what are you so afraid of? What are you so afraid of? I'm going to find out. You know what I mean?
Well, what I always described it is tarot reminds someone of what they already know.
Exactly. That's really all it is. It's a check.
It's
validation.
A tool. You know, it's nothing magical, mystical. They're not going to possess your soul.
No.
You're not going to go to hell if you have a reading done. You're not going to suddenly start wearing gold rings in your ears and carrying around a crystal ball either. It's not going to change you. You know, the only person that can change you is you.
Yeah, that's the whole crux of it. That people just don't realize that, but it's.
Yeah. Do I read tarot? No. I've had friends that do. I've learned a little bit about it. I own a couple of decks, and you know, I actually own one that I really, really like. But I call it Tarot for Dummies. It's actually originally designed for working with animals. Messages from your animal companion.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, how most cards you have to learn the meanings and how to interpret them. These are real simple because on the card it tells you what it's for. Like the first one, I've got it right here beside me, and it says, special touch. And it shows a picture of a cat getting scratched. And it says, you know, my favorite spot's to be petted, stroked, or scratched. I sure could use your special touch right about now. Now, even though these are geared for animals, on simple things, a friend of mine who does read tarot, her and I sat around and with simple questions, she said these work just as good as any other cards.
Well, yeah, it's really about
energy,
energy, you know?
It's simpler for somebody like me that doesn't read cards because I don't have to learn anything. I don't have any books or classes or anything like that. It's just, you know, I could say, you know, what's wrong, you know, why does my back hurt or whatever, you know, and ask the question. And I may get some insight into why, you know, why my back hurts or why is my dog scratching all the time, you know, and that sort of thing. You know, I find them a useful little tool. But I call it, now Angelica, the lady who created this deck, probably wouldn't find it flattering, but I call it Tarot for Dummies because anybody can use it, including me. Am I going to put a tarot reader out of business? No, I'm afraid not. But it is, it's one of these things, because everybody needs tools in their arsenal to sort of get them through life. Because we all have questions, we all have decisions, we all have issues. It's just part of the life experience that we're going through.
Oh, definitely.
And so the more things that you can employ to help you make the best possible decision, I think the better off you are. As long as you don't get so involved with the tools that you end up making this decision by making no decision.
Yeah, that's the crux of it. I can't make a decision unless I talk to the cards. You're like, yes, you can. Just go for it, dude. Just roll with it.
Yeah, I have learned, though, over time to listen to my personal instincts, insights, my own inner voice, however you want to put it. Because ignoring my inner voice in the past has resulted in some very negative situations.
Definitely. I think that comes with awareness, too, being aware of your situation, being aware of yourself. I mean, that's the key right there.
Well, I've learned that, often my intuition is better prepared to answer questions or ask questions than my cognitive skills.
Yes.
You can reason me through something and make me make the incorrect decision. You can't fool my intuition.
Right.
And I've learned. When that voice says, cross the street right now, pay attention.
Yes, definitely. I think it's about, I think usually people know what they want to do in the first 10 seconds, and then they do the other, time is wasted on rationalizing it. And I think a lot of times if we had just gone with our initial reaction, it's usually correct. If people with situations, with life decisions, everything, I mean, there are so many times when I have known a person was bad for me in the first second I met them, and then, I'm like, no, I'll give them a chance. And then, it always ends up negative. And I'm like, okay, if I just paid attention to my intuition in the first 5 minutes, I would not be in this situation now. And so, nowadays, if I have a bad feeling about somebody, I just don't talk to them. Because it's probably better that way,
Yeah, in the past, probably the biggest intuitive incidences have revolved around people lying to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I would rationalize my way through it, but you don't have any proof that they're lying. Why would they lie, et cetera,
yeah,
et cetera,
exactly.
et cetera. And if I was just stuck with they're lying to you, you need to get out of this situation, don't go any further into it, I would have been much better off.
Exactly. Yep. That's probably true.
And sometimes it's created, ultimately it's been a huge financial disaster and everything else. Because usually, what's the motivation for people to lie to you? It involves money.
Yeah.
What is the least area, or the area of my least concern usually, unfortunately, is money. I'm just not that financially savvy, you might say. I don't pay that much attention to it. I don't have that much of it, but, why worry about it, I guess. That's the way I looked at it. But yeah, and so yeah, learning to pay attention to my intuition, I would say, has been one of the things in the last 5 years that I've really, really worked on listening to. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think everybody should. I think it's important to definitely.
And you try to second guess yourself. Is it wishful thinking that's making me think this way?
Yeah.
Am I being paranoid? So forth and so on. But that first instance thought is usually the correct one. It's been my experience.
Yes, usually it is. There's no getting around that. And, how many times does it take for you to figure that lesson out? And I think a lot of people, go through their lives sort of on autopilot, and they just forget to be aware of their surroundings, aware of their instincts. We all have the sixth sense for a reason. It wasn't just put there for nothing. So
Yeah, and well, I've often heard it said that being psychic is 90% observation, 10% something else.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that.
And I think about it. At one point in my life, I was a prison guard, and I could tell you a lot about a person just watching them walk.
Yep, because you're in tune to that. You watch it. I mean, not to say that it's all cold reading, because it's not, but it is. There's.
Well, even now, when people watch, I watch how people walk, because it tells me so much about who they are, about how they perceive the world, and how, therefore, the world perceives them.
Yeah, and the other aspect of that is with the words that people use, how they enunciate things, how the word structure.
Uh-huh.
That has a lot to do with how they feel about themselves and the people around them too. So I mean, all that
Yeah, I think for me though, it's actually seeing them move.
Movement. You get it.
How they move tells me a lot. Now there again, that doesn't work in cases where somebody has cerebral palsy or they're bound to a wheelchair bound or something like that. Then I don't have that option. Whereas words, you can often have it then too.
Right.
But on the watching people move, I would say for me that is the most important thing. And maybe it's because I'm more in tune to movement. I worked with animals most of my life. That was, how I judged whether or not a dog would have good conformation, whether a horse would be good to ride, was by their movement. And, if a dog can't move right, they don't have good conformation. I don't care who their parents are, They have to move right. Every once in a while you'll see an animal or a human that when you watch them move, it's like poetry in motion.
Yes.
Well, that's when everything's just right. Oh, it doesn't happen that often. Most of us are a little off,
Yeah.
And nobody would ever say I'm poetry in motion. I've been called a klutz my entire life. In fact, as a child, I was sent to ballet classes in hopes that I would develop grace. It didn't work. Well, we're down to the last minute, so you want to tell everybody about your website again before we go?
Sure. It's heatherwoodward.net. And you can find my book there. I've done a DVD. I do tarot readings, all kinds of stuff. So it's all there.
Okay. Well, folks, we have run out of time once again. I would like to thank Heather Woodward for joining us tonight and being such an interesting guest. You've been great, Heather.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I've enjoyed the program with Heather tonight, and I hope all of you have as well, and that you found it provided you plenty of food for thought and more illumination for your personal journey towards truth. Join us again next week as Michal Ledwith joins us for another live episode of The Dawn of Shades. Sure to be another fascinating conversation. With that, we are out of time. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and good night.